Rick Carpinello joins us here on the Athletic Hockey Show. Rick, how you doing?
Hey guys, it's good to see you guys, your faces again, and I'm repping my hat still.
Yeah.
And
I lost that hat, that athletic hat. Like
You
I
can't
got
get
it the
it,
day
man.
I got hired. I lost it. And it
Oh,
was just one of the saddest things ever that I
oh,
lost that
that's
hat.
so
I love that
sad.
hat.
Really, and it's such an honor to follow Mr. Brown. Oh my gosh, that's a
Such a weird middle name. His middle name is Goes.
yeah.
His goes. It's kind of a
He's,
weird.
he's great though, man. He's great. He's awesome.
I
He's
was about to say,
awesome.
like, I don't think we've ever met in any capacity, Rick. I think you might have either just left the
Mm,
Athletic around the time I got there. At least we just kind of maybe we just crossed paths and just missed each other. But
mm,
definitely from my early
yeah.
days, just following the Athletic, just you were the guy when it came to New York Rangers stuff, and you have a great book that we're going to talk about on the podcast today. Just to start off, what made you want to write this book about the New York Rangers?
Well, I always had it in the back of my mind. I had done a couple of books about the Rangers early in my career, and um, wasn't thrilled with either one of them. My Messier book was I had never done a book before, so I think I could have done a better job with it. And the other one was a season book, and during a season that turned out to be a disaster. So I always had in the back of my mind that I wanted to do it again at some point. And then Triumph Books, the publisher, called me a number of times. They wanted to do this Rangers book. Actually, it wasn't this Rangers book. It was kind of a different idea, but we took it forward and it turned into this. Um, and so I didn't want to do it while I was still working because I wanted to really dedicate some time to it. And then when I retired, it just became a natural thing for me. And honestly, I probably could have written 3 times as many words as I did with the stories that I have remembered since the last time since I finished writing it. But yeah, it's something that I had a lot of anecdotes stuck in the back of my head for a lot of years. Toward the end of my career, I started typing them into a file so I wouldn't forget them, like I forget where my keys are and where my car is.
Oh boy.
And so I decided that once I retired, it'd be a good time to try to do this, and it was a lot of fun.
So, Carp, obviously the Rangers have a long, long history. Did you focus on a specific area here, the area that you covered, or does
Yeah.
this go all the way back?
No, we talk a little bit about previous years, but it's mostly from 78, 79, which was my first season on the beat, through my retirement. And so, that's why they call it curated, I guess. When they said there's going to be a curated history, I'm like, well, I'm not going back to Emil Francis and John Ferguson and Lester
Hard to get
Patrick.
those guys on the phone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was difficult.
So, I said, I really don't, I'm not up for doing that kind of research. I'll give you what I covered and you can call it whatever you want. But they said, yeah, that's what a curated history is. It's your version of the history of the team. So I said, okay, great. So we started in 78, 79 when I was a 21-year-old or something, covering high school sports and getting a chance to cover the New York Rangers, and through the end of my career, which was in November 21, I think it was. November 21. So um, that's the history. The history is those 43 years.
Can you tell the story of how you ended up on the Rangers beat?
Yeah, it was interesting. I worked for a newspaper, the Gannett newspapers in Westchester, which became the Journal News later on. But at that time, it was 9 separate local newspapers throughout the northern suburbs of New York City, and each one had its own dedicated local writer. Some had more than one, and anyway, we became the prototype for USA Today. They decided to run it through our paper. So we started publishing a second paper in the morning. It was called Today, and it was on peach-colored paper. So it was always reach for the peach. Anyway, they needed a bunch of writers to fill in the sports section. So they gave each of us kids covering high school sports what they called an area of expertise. And nobody wanted to do hockey. I was like, I'll do hockey. I love hockey. So I would have done anything. But so each of us had a beat, so to speak. Now, in other cases, there were other beat writers who were actually the main beat writers. But we were allowed to go to practices, go to home games, write short sidebars for the prototype, and then ultimately, it turned for me into a full-time beat. It was the luckiest break anybody could ever get, and for a lot of us, and it turned into a career.
So one of my favorite things early on in I started on the Hawks in 2013 was hanging around Bob Verdi, who's kind of a contemporary of yours, covered the Blackhawks in the
Yeah,
80s and the 90s, obviously for the Chicago Tribune, and just hearing how different the job was back then,
yeah.
pre-internet, pre just all the barriers that have been put up between players and reporters. When you think back on those early years when he was kind of the Wild West in the 70s and 80s, how different was the job? Not the league, but the job.
The job was unbelievably different. Like, first of all, it was a little easier too. Let's not get past that, because all you had to do was write your story for the newspaper.
Yeah.
Some of us at some times during my career didn't even have to write an early story, didn't have to write a running story, just file a story after the game with quotes and everything. One shot, you're out. And that was fun. That was pretty easy to do. The hard part was, you had to carry your typewriter to the game. B,
Jeez.
there were a couple of guys in the press box who ran a telefax company who would take your story and fax it to your newspaper, where somebody else would have to type it in. Um, so, uh, and then came the really raw computers. My first computer was called a Teleram, and it was probably 40 pounds, at least 30, with a big metal handle. It was like a big metal suitcase. And you'd put that on your desk, and every couple of sentences you'd have to hit record, and so it would save, so you wouldn't lose what you just typed.
Oh
And then
my
you'd get a
God.
telephone and you'd plug it into the top of this Teleram thing, and it would make that screeching noise like "ee" while it's sending. And then it would send, and you have to call and make sure they got it. And a lot of times they didn't get it. And so those were the first days of technology. But
I thought this was supposed to be easier. What is this?
that wasn't that hard. I mean, when you consider writing an early, writing a running, doing a blog, doing pregame video, doing postgame video, tweeting throughout, all this new stuff that we didn't have back then. At the end of my career, my pre and post game videos and my blog were 10 times more important than my game story.
Yeah.
And so, things do change, and things do get more difficult and more time consuming.
How
But
how 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 different was the player reporter relationship?
well,
Like how easier, like
that was
your
wild.
access to them?
Yeah.
Right.
First of all, my first team had John Davidson, Dave and Don Maloney, Ron Duguay, Ron Gresh. I mean, they're just characters, right?
Mhm.
You couldn't make it up. And and the players, after a game, would sit in their uniform. Some would take their jerseys off, but they'd sit in their pads and their shorts in their locker for hours, drinking beer. They would they would bum cigarettes off me. I used to smoke. They would
No
smoke
way.
cigarettes and drink beer in the locker room in their uniforms for half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour, depending on how the game went. And you could stay in there as long as you want. So it was different. And the greatest thing to me was, when guys work on their sticks before a game, they have that little carpentry station outside the locker room, and blow torches and saws and all kinds of noisy equipment, spray paints. We had access to them during that time. And that's where you develop friendships and relationships, because you would just talk to the guys. If you had a question for a story, they'd be happy to answer it. But you had their ear for all that time. And a lot of them were just looking to talk to people and relax before a game while they're doing their sticks.
And this,
That
and you could talk to them in the press box when they were scratches too, right?
well, that too.
That's where you get the
Oh
really
my
good
Yeah,
stuff.
God.
that,
Yeah,
and
for
and
sure.
guys weren't shy back then either to talk about their coach or their teammate or
Yeah.
but it was, compared to what it is now, it was 180 degrees.
Okay, just going over your time covering the Rangers on the subject of relationships, who are some of the players throughout the history of your time covering them that you developed the best relationships with?
Well, if you look at the cover of my book, you could easily see two of them.
Absolutely.
Brian
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 Leach has
Leach
to be
and
one of them.
I mean, he's done the forward to two of my books. and I haven't been able to pay him a cent, and he didn't want a cent. So I mean that speaks volumes right there. And Mike Richter wrote a couple of blurbs for the book jacket, and Mike actually wanted to read the whole book first because he wouldn't say something that wasn't coming from his heart. So he did. He read the whole book before he would comment on the. But those are guys, and Adam Graves, who is the nicest person I've ever met. Not the nicest athlete, the nicest human being I've ever met. And guys like that. And I still have great relationships with JD and the Maloneys and all the way down the line. But yeah, I would have to say, of the guys that I really keep in touch with, I text with all the time, number two in the Hall of Fame defenseman is probably right up there.
It's funny. I grew up on Long Island as a diehard Islanders fan. I hated the Rangers more than like anything in the world. Like just vitriol I felt for them. When they won the cup in '94 is like the darkest day of my life. And I hated Brian Leetch so much. I despised Brian Leetch.
Yeah.
And then last year I was doing a story on guys getting traded very late in their career, just spending their whole career with one team. It was a Kane and Taves story. And I'm like, oh, Brian Leetch, perfect example. I'll get him on the phone. He was so nice. Yeah. He broke down in tears twice, talking about how much he loved the Rangers and how hard he was so emotionally honest. I'm like, I hung up and I texted my dad. I go, God damn it, I like Brian Leetch now.
Yeah, he's great. And you know what? That really did break his heart. That was his birthday too.
Yeah. He told me that. He said he was in the hotel in Boston and he went into the bathroom and he just started crying.
It was awful. And Glenn didn't tell him. And he made it very clear to Glenn Sather that he didn't want to be traded. So yeah, that was a really hard time for him. But he's a tremendous guy, and he doesn't think he was that good. Like when you guys did the rankings last year,
show 99.
And I talked to him about where he was ranked and stuff, and he was like, oh, yeah, I was pretty surprised. Carp, were you? I'm like, yeah, I'm a little surprised. He goes, and then he said he's surprised that he was that high. Like he was surprised Mess was so low and that he was that high. So like that's Brian. And
we had him at number 30 for what it's worth, which is pretty darn good.
Yeah.
It's really good.
So we did a story just before I left about Adam Fox because he was about to win the Norris Trophy that year. And Brian talked about him like there's no question Adam Fox was better than he was. And I'm like, wait a minute, he wasn't. He's not. And maybe someday he'll dream to be. But Brian was an all-time great who didn't think he was an all-time great. So he's a different kind of human being, boy, and he's just so loyal to the people he was loyal to. And if he wasn't loyal to you, you'd never know it by talking to him.
Is there an anecdote from your book that you enjoyed writing about more than any of the other ones you wrote about?
The one that I did, and it stemmed from a story I wrote for The Athletic, was one of the great ones was Don Maloney, who was the assistant GM at the time, talking about what was going on at the draft table in Calgary the day they got Henrik Lundqvist in the 7th round, and the arguments they had over whether they should take that pick, make the goalie pick. They already drafted a goalie named Brandon Snee. They were looking for a guy who was going to ultimately replace Mike Richter. And the argument going on back and forth at that draft table in the 7th round to take this goalie from Sweden that they didn't really know. Christer Rockstrom, the European scout, knew him and was pushing for him, but wasn't pushing really hard. And then they heard that Dallas was going to take Lundqvist to pair him with his brother Joel, his twin brother Joel, who they had drafted early, and they decided to take a flyer on Henrik Lundqvist, and that turned out pretty well. And some of my other favorite stories were, quick shots like the night that Barry Beck came flying out of the shower singing the Kinks version of Superman, wearing a blue towel around his neck, goggles, cowboy boots, and nothing else. And he's dancing around the locker room. And it was as disturbing as it was hilarious. But and Beck was a character too. So, those types of stories were kind of my favorites to get out there. And the ones that I always wish that I could have told people. And now I finally had an avenue to tell it.
Was it all off the top of your head, or did you do any fresh reporting on it? Did you have to call people up, or just institutional knowledge? That's incredible to me.
I mean, I did a lot of, back reading into my stories and my notes and my things, but I didn't really per se make long phone calls to get new stuff.
That's amazing.
It's
so cool.
things that and the book's been written basically for almost a year now, and in that year I'm thinking, oh, I should have told that story. I should have, so. But yeah, it's top of my head, and fortunately, I wrote it when I did because this head is really.
That's
not
what I'm
as
saying.
good
I
as
don't
it used
remember
to be.
anything that happened like 3 seasons ago anymore. It's all gone.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't tell you stuff that happened during regular seasons, or if you ask me, what the Rangers did in the '87 playoffs, I have no idea. I had no idea. But I remember '85, '86 for sure. The Ted Sater year, and they went to the Eastern Finals. I can remember a lot about that, but my brain's got a lot of stuff stored away in different envelopes apparently, and I was able to find some of them.
Can you describe your favorite Rangers moment to cover? I can imagine, and unfortunately, it might make Mark angry.
Trigger warning for me.
Yeah. Well, Mark, it wasn't the first round of '93 fight '94 playoffs.
I'm gonna take my headphones out right now.
He's gonna walk out.
6 love. I remember that. I was there for one of them.
Oh my gosh! I mean, that was just a wipeout, and there were people who thought they're going to be in trouble with this Islanders team. Because they struggled with them in Nassau Coliseum up until that year. But yeah, obviously those 4 games actually in the playoffs, the game 6, Messier's game 6, Matteau's game 7. And I have a really good story in there about Matteau and how he had a hard time handling his celebrity and his status as an absolute franchise hero after that game 7, because he played less than 2 seasons as a Ranger. He was absolutely on a pedestal after scoring that goal. I mean, Matteau is like one of the all-time franchise icons, and he had a hard time handling that. And then going forward, obviously, the game in which Richter stopped the Pavel Bure penalty shot, and we went into that at great length in the book. And then of course, Game 7, after all the chaos, the Mike Keenan chaos, the losing Game 5 and 6 in Vancouver, and having to come back, and Mike Keenan wanted to take the team to Lake Placid for a practice just to get away from the media, and Messier and Kevin Lowe had to talk him out of it. And there's so much around those 4 great games, and then there were other games too, but those 4 unbelievable, unforgettable games, the chaos around that team, and the near sabotaging by Keenan of that series. Of both
I love how
series.
so many franchises have a Mike Keenan story.
Yeah, that's so weird how that is.
And most of them are the same, except only one of them ends with the trophy. But even the one that ends with the trophy, he's negotiating his way out of town despite 4 more years left on his contract. So they all have some sort of that element to them. But hey, full credit to him, right? I mean,
he's good in small doses.
How many other coaches in the last 83 years have won the Stanley Cup for the New York Rangers? Likewise, how many GMs? Poor Neil Smith can't even get a job in the league, and he did the unthinkable. So, but yeah, those are obviously standout moments during those last 2 rounds of playoffs.